Welcome to this panel where we're going to introduce and discuss the guide that we're launching today, Practical Guide for to Implementing Responsible Research Assessment at Research Funding Organisations, which has been developed in collaboration with the Global Research Council and Science Europe. So my name's Ginny Barber. I'm one of the DORA co-chairs. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief at the Medical Journal of Australia, and I'm an adjunct professor at QUT. So just before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where I live and work. So for me, that is the Turrbal and the Yagara people of Meanjin in Brisbane. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to extend that respect to any Indigenous people who are with us today. You're very welcome to share your traditional country in the chat if you would like. So this is the second of 3 online launch events, and we're really excited to hear today from panelists from the Asia Pacific region about the status and how to implement responsible research assessment in our different environments. So the goal for all of us today is to leave here with both a better understanding of the issues around responsible research assessment and how DORA's new guide to responsible research assessment for funders and the Global Research Council GRC Self-Assessment tool can help you to take concrete actions in your own environments. So the plan for the session is that I will briefly talk about DORA and the guide, and then we will hear from Grace Estiolore from the Global Research Council Responsible Research Assessment Working Group on their new self-assessment tool. And then from our speakers on their reflections about how they see responsible research assessment in their environments and how they think the guide might be useful there. We'll close with a few questions from you, so start thinking about questions now and please pop them in the chat. So with me today, co-hosting this event is Grace Estiolore. Grace serves as the head of the Policy Coordination and Monitoring Division at the Philippine Council for Industry, Energy and Emerging Technology Research and Development. And she's responsible there for organisational, strategic and operational planning activities and policy review and development. She also serves as the overall coordinator for the Council's international cooperation initiatives and oversees the management of calls and the evaluation of proposals for both national and international joint funding programmes. Managing the meeting on the technical aspects today is Janet Catterall. Janet is Programme Manager of Open Access Australasia, and she supports DORA in most of our work in the Asia Pacific. Behind the scenes also is Giovanna Lima. Giovanna is the DORA Programme Manager, and many of you will have received emails from her, I'm sure, if you've interacted with us at all. So thank you for the excellent support that we'll have today. So before I jump into introducing the guide, I'll also introduce you to our panelists who will reflect on it after on it, and Grace will also be part of that reflection. So the 2 panelists to introduce you to, so Mark Stagg. Mark returned to Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2008 after nearly a decade working as a researcher in physiology with a focus on the cellular mechanisms of underlying heart disease. Following his research, Mark transitioned into research management and joined the Royal Society Te Aparangi, New Zealand's National Academy, where he works in the research funding team. Mark now leads this team, which is responsible for designing, delivering and monitoring robust, defensible and fair processes for the allocation of research funding. And his work supports high standards of integrity, transparency and accountability across New Zealand's research system. So Lee Harris, our second panellist, has over 20 years of experience in the Australian public service, including over 14 years in research programmes and policy, including the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy, which many of you may know as NCRIS. His key achievements include the 2015 Research Infrastructure Review, the 2016 NRI Roadmap, and the 2018 and 2020 Research Infrastructure Investment Plans. He joined the ARC in 2020 and has worked on ERA EI review and preparations for ERA 2023. Since ERA has been discontinued, his work has focused on the development of a new approach to national research evaluation, improving the ARC's approach to open access and the use of persistent identifiers to inform insights into the Australian research sector. So welcome, Grace, Mark and Lee. So before we begin, I'm going to share a little bit about DORA and the guide that we're launching today. So next slide, please. So DORA, in case you are not familiar with what we do, DORA is the Declaration on Research Assessment. It is both a statement of principles and also an organisation that campaigns for and supports reform of research evaluation practices. The declaration draws attention to potential problems of journal-based metrics in hiring, promotion and funding decisions. That was very much its origin, but also the need to recognise the quality and impact of a broader range of scholarly contributions and the contributions from researchers more widely. It's a set of 18 recommendations for funders, institutions, publishers, metric suppliers, and researchers. It's currently signed by over 27,000 individuals and organisations. Signing the declaration is an important way for individuals and organisations to publicly declare their commitment to improve research and research practices by supporting a shift towards what we now call responsible research assessment. And the definition of this, I think, is important for the conversations today. It's an umbrella term for approaches to assessment which incentivise, reflect and reward the plural characteristics of high quality research in support of diverse and inclusive research cultures. So our mission at DORA is to advance practical and robust approaches to research assessment globally and across all scholarly disciplines. We work with all actors in the system: scholars, funders, academic institutions, learned societies, publishers, and metrics providers to advance this agenda. And building on this momentum for change and action in the past few years, we were very fortunate to receive a grant from the Arcadia Foundation, through which we created a set of resources to support academic reform within academic and scholarly institutions. And the Practical Guide for Research Performing Organisations is one of the resources that we launched last year in May 2025, and we'll pop that in the chat for you. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, I would really encourage you to. Based on the success of that volume, we co-created the Guide for Research Funding Organisations. So this is what we're launching today. So without further delay, here's the guide. Next slide, please. So the aim of this guide is to answer a common question that we get, which is, how do I get started with research assessment reform? We see the guide as a one-stop shop for research funding organisations to take them from the recognition of the need for responsible research assessment, that it needs to happen, towards implementing and then ultimately monitoring a strategy. It has practical tips, resources and examples to help with implementation of the principles of responsible research assessment. This is, of course, a challenging endeavour. We're writing for a wide diversity of funders, public, private, and across different sectors and in many different landscapes, which face their own complex challenges. So that means that the guide is to be used as you think best. Pick and choose what makes sense for you as an organisation. We know that one size does not fit all, and that's why we'll explore some of those differences with the panel today. So next slide, please. This slide has been co-created with DORA's funder groups and through a workshop which helped us make the side more accessible. So this was the photograph that was taken after the co-creation meeting that we had in Copenhagen at the end of December last year. A large number of the people who are in that photograph have supported the guide all the way through. The next slide also shows the entirety of the group that was involved in developing the guide, including individuals from the Science Europe and the Global Research Council. So the guide is comprised of 4 main chapters. They are intended to be standalone to allow you to pick and choose as you see best. That does mean there's a little bit of repetition between them. We start with a short introduction to responsible research assessment in chapter 1, where we share the context of research assessment reform, remind about the principles of responsible research assessment, and reinforce the benefits of coordinated action towards research assessment at a global scale. So chapter 2, which gets really into the meat of what we're doing, lists 7 potential key activities the research funding organisation may want to engage in. So these activities are ordered and numbered for the sake of reader clarity, but they do not need to be done in order. And in fact, they are not intended to be prescriptive in the order that they are done, or if at all. We very much encourage you to look at them and see what is appropriate for your organisation at a particular time. I will just say that I think in the past we have felt very much that engaging organisational leadership is such a critical thing to do, which is why it has ended up at the top of the list, but it may well be not appropriate for you and your organisation. So chapter 3, which is the next slide, delves into 5 key moments in research assessment in the funding cycle, and what types of interventions you could think about as a funder in each of these of them. There are tables that are menus of options, with what we've seen funders doing across the globe, and you can see here an example of one of the key moments and how we have laid it out, and it's linked to a specific resource. So again, not intended to be done either in order, done prescriptively, but to be done or to be looked at a time that is appropriate for your organisation. So chapter 4, that's how responsible research assessment connects with other components of the research system. So I'm sure that you will all be very familiar with the fact that there are many interrelated initiatives such as open science, research integrity, societal impact. And our view is that these initiatives are both influenced by and influence responsible research assessment. And you'll see here we have a new diagram, which we are very proud of, and which we hope helps to illustrate some of the interrelationships between all these areas. This chapter really makes the case that these initiatives need to be considered holistically, and it's especially important because we know that there are many organisations and individuals that are working on different parts of this, but often without thinking of it holistically, it can be very hard to maximise and drive change across the system. So this particular chapter aims to pull all of that together. So as well as the guide, there will be collateral material which we hope will help you in implementing the guide. And it also includes some new case studies that are in it, which showcase different examples of implementing responsible research assessment. 4 of them have been adapted from the Global Research Council case study library, and 1 has been developed specifically for this guide. And that is from the Canadian federal agencies on how they're integrating Indigenous perspectives into their research funding cycle. These are all live now in our repository of case studies, and I would encourage you to look at them there and to explore the others that we have. So that's the end of the discussion or the introduction to the guide. Before we go to the panel, I'm now delighted to say, as we have worked with the Global Research Council on their new resource, which is the self-assessment tool for funders. So Grace, may I invite you now to share that tool with the audience.
Thank you, Jeannie. So good day. Today, I am soft launching the Responsible Research Assessment Self-Assessment Tool for Funders ahead of its official release at next week's Global Research Council annual meeting. So this was developed by the GRC's Responsible Research Assessment Working Group together with DORA. And this tool helps funders review practices, identify gaps, and advance fair, transparent, and inclusive research assessment. So we go to the next slide, please. The vision of the GRC RRA working group is for its participant organizations and the organizations they fund to embed assessment approaches that incentivize and reward the diverse attributes of research excellence. So to achieve this vision, the working group focuses on 4 interconnected areas. First, shared understanding by developing common frameworks and language around responsible research assessment. Second, sharing practice by documenting and disseminating real-world examples from funding organizations across different contexts. Third, coordinated action through practical tools and guidance that enable funders to translate principles into implementation. And finally, ongoing support by sustaining dialogue, peer learning, and continuous improvement. So through this approach, the working group aims to position the GRC as a global convening space for responsible research assessment, strengthen its role as a leading voice among research funding organizations, and support the advancement of RRA to foster a more diverse, inclusive, and high-quality global research culture. Next slide. So the Responsible Research Assessment Working Group brings together representatives from all regions of the Global Research Council. So this ensures that its work reflects a truly global perspective on responsible research assessment. So this is co-chaired by Sean McGuirk of NSERC Canada and Nosisa Dube of NRF South Africa, following the completion of Mohammed Al-Shamsi's term of RDIA Saudi Arabia. So the working group's activities are further supported and distributed secretariat from NSERC in Canada, UKRI in the UK, and NCRST in Namibia. Next slide. So this outlines the GRC's phased approach to advancing RRA globally. Starting with the 2020 report, the working group was formalized in 2021 with an action plan in 2022. Phase 1 built a shared understanding through the dimensions of RRA published in 2024 and Transforming Assessment 2025. And Phase 2 focused on sharing practices through case studies. Now, in the coordinated action phase, the RRA self-assessment tool and DORA practical guide support funders in reviewing practices, identifying gaps, and planning next steps. Finally, this work is supported by ongoing peer engagement, shared learning, and continuous improvement, reinforcing the GRC's commitment to fair and transparent research assessment worldwide. Slide. So this slide explains how the RRA self-assessment tool works and how organizations can use it in practice. So RRA implementation is organized around specific dimensions. So we have about 11 dimensions. And for each dimension, an organization assesses its current stage of implementation from early exploration to more established practice. So these stages help organizations understand not just whether an activity exists, but how embedded and systematic it is. So the tool uses a set of simple yes or no questions with a why component designed for each dimension. So these questions prompt structured reflections across governance, capacity building, and monitoring. So in practice, organizations first select the dimensions most relevant to them and assess their current RRA stage. So this helps identify gaps, guide internal discussions, and support planning of the next steps that are realistic and context specific. Next slide. In closing, we encourage research funders to use available guidance, join global discussions, and share case studies to strengthen the evidence base. Continued engagement and feedback are key to advancing responsible, transparent, and inclusive research assessment. We welcome further dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's really good to see this tool launched, and I really look forward to hearing about feedback on how it's used and how it kind of particularly how it might complement the work that we've done for the guide. So thank you so much for sharing that today. Excellent, Mark and Lee. So now to the panel discussion. I'm very much looking forward to this. The way that we're going to run this is I will kick off with some questions for the three of you. I'll invite one of you to kick off, and then we'll have a conversation around each question. For those in the audience, please do feel free to add some questions into the chat, and we'll make sure that we spend time to get to those in the end. So just to start off, thinking about the landscape across the different regions that some of these tools have to be worked across. So Lee, I'll start with you. So maybe could you perhaps have a think about what do you think are the main benefits of implementing responsible research assessment, particularly with the focus in the Australian research system, and perhaps if you could share some success stories.
Thanks, Ginny. Yeah, look, I think from an ARC context and a wider Australian context, there's probably a number of benefits in implementing RRA. So I think the first thing that comes to mind would be the supporting and celebrating of high quality research and really try and encourage that move away from narrow metrics and really focus on encouraging meaningful, rigorous and impactful research. I also think it strengthens trust and for the ARC helps reinforce the social contract with the research community, but also the wider public and provides reassurance that assessment activities undertaken are fair, meaningful, and also support a diverse and inclusive research culture. I think also it promotes equity, diversity, and inclusion by recognising a broader range of contributions. and also helping to address systemic biases that can occur in assessment models. I think importantly, it also helps support a strong and healthy research system, and also really keeps Australia current and aligned with global movements and thinking. I might just also add, I think from an ARC perspective, I guess we're early, a bit late to, early in our journey, but a bit late to the party perhaps in terms of RA. But I think it's actually really important to consider RA as part of an interconnected system. It's really, when we think about RA, it's also how it can link in with other parts of the system in terms of open access and increased visibility research, better linking of research impact through things like persistent identifier and PID infrastructure. I think better curation research as well across all disciplines, with things around research repository standards, but also ensuring data and outputs of research are fair. And there are also some of the challenges we're trying to work through, as we're outlined in our research data framework, which we released last year. So I think we believe looking at these areas in conjunction, not isolation, will really help present a more cohesive message to stakeholders.
Thanks, Lee. I think that's great. I really like this idea of the social contract and how we reinforce that. We know that we're in a time of huge misinformation, disinformation, and I think responsible research assessment absolutely feeds into that. Mark or Grace, did you want to follow on from that at all?
Look, no mai haere mai, it's a hui taupa. Just welcome to everybody for joining in on this Zoom hui. It's really good to be here. I'm Mark, and I work in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I'll try and support some of the things that Lee said. It was a wonderful and fulsome way in which I think we should think about how there are a lot of benefits in implementing responsible research assessment and how that then feeds on to our social contract that you've highlighted, Ginny. So I support that wholeheartedly. I think the public does like to know that what we do and the money that the governments spend, that we probably as funders are trying to manage, is done responsibly, fairly, equitably. Sometimes that causes a little bit of friction out there in the public, and we are very mindful of those things when they come up in the context that we live in. So I think that the best thing that we can have on our side is where we have a demonstrable, robust, and fair process that we can point to and say, these are done with the best ways that we know possible and the least amount of bias. And it is selecting excellent research to be undertaken within the country that will advance the country's benefits and impacts. So I think those are real key things that kind of just broadly support what Lee said, really.
Yes, I think that concept of fairness and kind of respect for the public's money, I think, is a really critical point. Yeah, Grace, did you want to follow on from that at all?
Yeah, actually, looking at the guide, I realized that it's very helpful for us in the Global South. It brings together very diverse research system under one shared principles while still allowing flexibility for local needs. So it also helps improve fairness, transparency, consistency without requiring a single model. So that's important in the region with different capacities and priorities. So for example, in the Philippines, like the OSTP shared, we already demonstrate many RRA aligned practices. But it's only now when I've read the guide that, oh, wow, we're already using several of these practices. So these include, for example, the early announcement of our calls. So it's about 4 to 6 months in advance to help everyone prepare from the applicants to the technical panelists as well. So we have stakeholder consultations, call conferences, which help align research topics with real sector needs and guide applicants. We have also the 2-stage evaluation process, the concept and full proposal, and this ensures relevance and quality early on. So while we have also a multi-tiered review system, which allows us to look at different aspects on the quality to be assessed, like for example, the technical merit, the socioeconomic impact, and the overall use. So we have also digital systems that allow our applicants, or we call them proponent, to see the reviewers' feedback during the whole evaluation processes. So this strengthens the transparency and accountability. And at the same time, we have also strong feedback and learning mechanisms where inputs from reviewers and applicants are regularly collected and translated into concrete improvements, such as refining the evaluation criteria, adjusting the timelines of evaluation, and even introducing innovations like the use of short video presentations to improve our efficiency. So from the Global South, we can learn several important best practices. To summarize it, focus on societal impact, alignment with national needs, inclusive participation, capacity building, and transparency and continuous improvement.
Thank you, Grace. And I really like the idea that the guide was able to reinforce some of the things that you were doing already, because I think we often feel like we work in silos in this area, and that's a really good function that it can perform. So Mark, just a question for you then to kick off. So what do you think are the resources needed for research assessment reform in your part of the world? Oh, you're just on mute, Mark.
Someone had to do that first. I guess the goal we're all aiming for is something that's a bit coherent. It's quite rich across funders, universities, both public and private research organizations, and is responsive to the needs of government. So it's quite a big thing that we're all trying to pull under this one big banner of responsible research assessment. And I guess I'm about to say the key resource, I want to come back to perhaps the principle that you highlighted, Ginny, around engaged leadership. You kind of need that, I think, to start off, and then you can start to ask for the resources and get underway. Things that I probably would put also amongst resources is time. We often find ourselves very busy doing what we've always done, and trying to be bold or willing to give new things a go can be a bit of a struggle. It can be hard. But when we've got the resources that Dora is pulling together and the GRC pulls together, it becomes a lot easier. There is guidance, there are steps, there are exemplars, all of those things that we have, which will encourage us to move forward and make some behavioral changes. And I think that's not just on the research community or the panelists or the assessors. I actually think that's on funders too, and what we can do. So there is probably a little bit of a tendency to be a bit complacent, and to try and stretch ourselves a little bit. It does take that engaged leadership, and it does take time. And I think there's something also to be said about trying to find the right kind of mechanisms with which to use an assessment process for, whether that's the peer review one that we know quite well, that provides expressions of interest stages, like the early concept that you were talking about, Grace, before you go to a full application, and feedback along the way so that we increase the transparency. All of those things are really good in supporting, but they do take time and effort. Somebody has to put those things together. Somebody has to be able to prepare the documents or note down that feedback and get that communicated. So that's again probably making sure you don't shortchange the resource of time to deliver on some of that assessment. There's other things that we can think of, like the wisdom of the crowd, where applicants assess each other. We've done trials of that before. So trying new things is a really good thing, and publishing those things and putting them out there for the other funders to find is a really good thing. And I know the Rory Initiative is a really great example to look at, where they do the research on research. And sometimes it may be that a light touch is important, where you do a little short pre-assessment that's not hard, and perhaps balloting when you're in the early career researcher stage, following that up with quality assurance checks afterwards to make sure the right types of people are being selected to adhere to the kind of terms that you might have to work with. So there's quite a lot of things to think about, I think, in what you need to do in building that coherent space across it. And that's just the funder view that I'm talking about there. There's also a real desire, particularly within Aotearoa New Zealand, that we need to think about including Indigenous viewpoints, particularly the Māori aspirations and Mātauranga Māori, the knowledge bases that they have. We're quite fortunate. I think a lot of those things are already captured within government policies here in our country. We have a Vision Mātauranga policy, which is there for the uplifting of Māori. But that is really also needed to have direct support. So when you're creating fund settings, you need to think about how you want to create budgets that will allow those things to be accessed and used and seen so that you can really get a joined up and more cohesive research community. And I think maybe this all comes back to what resources do we need, to the sorts of things we just talked about a little bit before. You need to have open access. Somehow we use persistent identifiers as well through ORCID. So we also do all of those things and try and help launch a Pacific hub around ORCID from Aotearoa, New Zealand into the Pacific as well. So these things, again, take a bit of time and effort. So it's probably seeing how far you can get to get those things out of government, if that's your main or principal source of funding, to say these are really excellent initiatives that do need to be continued and followed through. And that's probably the hard thing, getting the engaged leadership at the beginning, getting the time, showing some demonstrable progress. But you've got a great plan there in the DORA guides and the GRC self-assessment tools to start moving you forward. So I just say good luck to you all.
Thanks, Mark. Look, I think time is absolutely something that we all struggle with, and I like the idea that perhaps something that this guide can do is actually perhaps provide some shortcuts so that the time, there's not necessarily the need to start again from scratch. Lee or Grace, anything that you would highlight with resources that you think are particularly needed in your region for responsible research assessment?
Might go first.
Thank you.
I think in the Australian context, I think the dispersal of funding, research funding, makes change. I've written the word here harder, but maybe it's not harder, but it's just slower. I think what the approach needs to be is actually trying to align with other funders collectively to perhaps enable some of that scale of change. And certainly the approach we've taken is obviously trying to engage with other funders to make sure there is alignment on some of these issues and really sort of enable a bit more greater progress. I think, as Mark said, I think resources are hard. It's in a constrained environment and continually strained across government, across institutions. It's always that challenge about, well, what's the benefit? Why do I need to make that change? And really sort of working with leadership to be really clear and succinct about why this is fundamental and why the change needs to happen is really important. And I think this guide is really useful for us, given the journey where we're at with research assessment and grant reform and evaluation reform. So I think it's really a question about how do we use these resources and really provide that leadership as a funder in the ARC context to make sure we make that change, but also how do we ensure it's a collective approach nationally so people will listen.
Thanks, Lee. Grace, what about you? What resources are particularly needed for the Philippines and the global South, perhaps?
Thank you, Jeannie. So I believe from our experience, leadership commitment is the foundational requirement to advancing RRA reform, because in the case of the OSP, shared progress was made because of the leadership who is actively championing the shift towards more responsible and inclusive assessment practices. So this was not a passive endorsement, because leaders set the direction by clearly signaling the RRA alignment is a priority and embedding these principles into the funding policies, evaluation criteria, and governance practices. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I like the idea of leadership as a resource and something that we have to push. I think that's a really good framing for this. So Grace, turning back to you. Oh, yes,
Jenny, can I
please
just,
go.
perhaps, sorry to interrupt you, just add, in reflecting through some of that conversation, it does remind me that we, well, in particular Aotearoa, New Zealand, where we sit at the bottom of the world, we're quite geographically isolated, perhaps like many in the Asia Pacific, but we can be well connected. And, it's increasingly done with virtual and digital spaces that are afforded to us to do something around that and join these global discussions. And, everyone's so very welcoming and happy to give of their knowledge and their expertise to kind of do this. But just picking up on a little bit of what Lee said as well, I do think there's probably a bit of a space for this sort of national getting together in some form or another. And I know that we had a really good thing happening within Aotearoa New Zealand for a while, where the funders were meeting regularly. And I think it was a powerful tool to try and align. And that was before we kind of became a little bit more cognizant of the DORA initiatives. And now I think we're probably leaning on what's happening out of the global discussions, but maybe we're not getting together quite as often as we could nationally to try and make the alignment consistent for the research community that we serve. And that's an area that we could improve. Again, it probably takes a bit of time, effort, and leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think you're absolutely right. Global conversations are great, but in the end, the change will really happen on the ground with local conversations. So maybe that's a call to people on this, a call out to anybody who's participating today to perhaps think about whether there are areas that, ways that could happen. All right. So let me just go to the next question. So Grace, what about you? Could we perhaps just explore what you think might be the benefits for the larger Asia Pacific region? But actually, even more importantly, what can we learn from the Global South to reflect elsewhere in the practice of responsible research assessment?
Yeah, first, again, I'd like to reiterate that the guide provides a clear and shared set of principles for RRA. So this is useful because the region, again, includes very different research systems. So we have large and small, well-resourced, and still developing. So this guide gives a common direction while still allowing each country or the funder to adapt based on their local needs. So second, it also helps funders reflect on what they are already doing. So just like what we did, many organizations in the region like Bishard already practice elements of RRA, as I mentioned a while ago, transparency, stakeholder management, and focus on impact. So this guide helps make these practices more organized, consistent, and visible, and show where improvements can be made. And then third, it supports practical improvement. So through these tools like self-assessment and examples, funders can easily identify gaps, strengthen their processes, and design better funding and evaluation systems without even needing to start from the scratch. So, and then fourth, it encourages regional learning, just like what mentioned a while ago by Mark. And yeah, and collaboration. Countries in Asia Pacific can learn from each other's experience, share the good practices, and adopt the ideas that work in similar contexts. And finally, it helps the region align the global efforts in research assessment reform while still keeping a strong focus on the local priorities, the societal impact, and inclusivity. And in simple terms, the guide acts as a roadmap as well as a bridge. So it helps Asia Pacific systems improve together in ways that are both globally aligned, but at the same time, locally relevant.
Thanks, Chris. I like the idea we're both a roadmap and a bridge. That feels something very practical, which I think is absolutely at the heart of this guide, is to try and provide practical tools for implementation. Lee and Mark, is there anything you would like to add to that in terms of perhaps the benefits for your region?
I think it's probably a similar thing as Grace mentioned. It's really enabling, I guess, an understanding of how we're interacting with our neighbours from a research point of view. And it's about where are those strengths, where are those gaps, what are the challenges, and how that can really inform sort of policy changes or answering policy questions.
Great, thanks, Lee.
Yeah, I suppose one thing I keep reflecting on a little bit is that we don't all have to be scoring brilliantly right off the get-go. So, coming back to the sense of a roadmap and a bridge, this is a journey that you can follow on. This is the starting point for some. Some will be further along. As Grace, you mentioned a bit earlier, it was great to see that you had certain areas you were doing really well in, but it's got the starting points and how to get better. And that's really a great sort of message to take home of how we can improve what we do.
Yes, thank you. So we've touched on this already, but I just wanted to sort of ask specifically, perhaps your thoughts on how the guide can help in your in your area? And I'm aware that we're sort of heading towards the time when I'd like to get questions from the audience, but perhaps starting with Lee, is there anything that you think that the guide can do to help funder organisations in Asia, in Australia and beyond? Any specifics you'd like to call out that we haven't discussed already?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I think it encourages that self-reflection and actually sort of provides a clear starting point. As I sort of mentioned around our journey, I think delving into the world of RRA perhaps could be tricky initially. And I really think this guide can help organisations that may not know how or where to begin, but also will help institutions identify gaps and strengths and think creatively. Look, in terms of a practical roadmap as well, it's going to really help support stage and realistic implementation. And I think that's a key thing for us. It's what is realistic, what is achievable, what's a pragmatic approach in order to really sort of sell that internally. Look, providing ideas, inspiration, support as well, but also I think with the roadmap, it's showing that path. So having an idea of where we are now, where we'd like to be, and how we can get there is really important to be able to sort of track that progress. But also I think, look, it builds confidence and really does signal that, look, this is a process. It's going to take some time. And really helps reduce perceived risks around change. Change management is obviously sort of a hard thing. And also, I think it really does help support communication. So it does facilitate really a shared basis of understanding across stakeholders about what RA is and what it looks like. It also helps explain why change is needed and most importantly, what it looks like in practice.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's exactly right. What does it look like in practice is, I think, the key for many organisations. Grace, you've touched on this a little bit already, but is there anything you'd like to talk about how the guide might help in the wider Asia Pacific region?
I believe I've expounded quite well on that already, and also Lee, so I don't have any more thoughts on it. Thank you.
Fantastic. We're going to be using your analogy of a bridge and a roadmap. I think that's a very strong one.
Right.
And then I think, great. So I think what we might just do to wrap up this part of it is a question that I'll start with Mark, and then I'll ask you both to reflect on. We've talked a little bit about learning from each other, but I just wanted to reflect on that as ask you to reflect on that as the last question. How can we learn from each other when we're in such different environments? I guess, how do you talk about this when you're going back to your organisation to discuss this?
I'm going to helicopter up a little bit on that question very quickly, Jenny, that here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we're going through quite major science system reforms, and that actually does include the funders as well. So finding something like the guide, the self-assessment tools, arriving at this time, I think are really quite important for our country right now, because it does give very good an evidence-based practical guide as to what we should be expecting in good responsible research assessment going forward. So all of those principles are there in place. We've talked about it. You can dip in and out of them as needed. But as we go through any reforms and as we look to be better as a country and how we might support research funding, then it's a great thing that we can get right into and hopefully pass on to others and make sure they're reading those and being engaged with it, and getting that leadership behind it right from the get-go, particularly in this time of change. So I suppose at that point, I'm trying to think a little bit more about what can we do to the various governance groups or policy people or influencers in the decision-making space that are really important about making this sort of cement in as a very sensible and perhaps not just sensible, but necessary way forward to come back to the things that we talked a bit more about with our social license and our contract with the public to be accountable for the spend and the investment and all of those things. This seems to be a really opportune time of this arriving on our doorstep, as it were, right now. So for that, I'm quite grateful.
Thank you, Mark. Lee or Grace, anything you'd like to reflect on about how we learn from each other, particularly in this sort of real time of change?
Sorry, Grace, I'll quickly go. I think I've written down the words here: conversation, conversation, conversation. So I think it's really important to continue these conversations, both within your organisation, within your country. But I think, as Mark said, the virtual world really allows that greater global integration discussions to keep happening. So it's continuing to have these discussions. It's continuing to be part of these sort of global groups and discussions and initiatives, really, as we keep going, and try and continue to have that internal champion. And I think the reverse of that is, don't discount yourself, Ginny. Having that really strong representative and advocate to lean on for advice and things like that is actually really valuable for us. So I think I'd pass some thanks back to you as well, and the rest of the Dora team.
Thanks. That's very much. It's very much appreciated. And I will just say, one of the things about, I think we all know about advocacy can be really hard, and so I really like the way that a meeting like this, for example, can help reinforce what we're all doing. So thank you for that, Lee. Grace, anything you'd like to reflect on about how we learn from each other?
Yeah, actually, we can learn from each other through the RRA working group by participating in the Global Research Council. So this brings together the GRC, together all the funders from all over the world. So we're about 100 countries, I believe. So we can openly share our experiences there and check what worked well and what challenges that we face together, and share what can be done for this. So we do not need to start from zero. So we can learn from real world examples, adopt good practices, and avoid repeating the same mistakes. So the working group also supports the continuous learning. So through ongoing discussion, we have also shared resources. We encourage submission also of case studies. We have regular exchanges, and this is for us to have to keep improving over time our approaches, not just once, but of course continuously.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, we've got a few questions. We had a couple come in through the when people registered, and we've got a couple of observations in the chat. I might just read out a couple of them, and then I'll ask either if any of you want to pick them up. The first one, I think, actually is really core to how can, as we replace research current ways that we do research assessment to more responsible research assessment, how do we really ensure quality as we move forward? I'd be really interested to hear your reflections on that. So that's the first one. The second one is, of course, we always we wouldn't get through any meeting nowadays if we didn't talk about AI, and I would welcome any of you if you had any reflections on, I guess, the role of AI in all of this this work that we're doing now. And then the third one is around where do we fit with peer? How do we support peer review in this approach going forward? Because we know that research, as we move to more responsible research assessment, we are going to be relying much more on peer review rather than metrics, and I think that's a challenge for us. So, yes, would anyone like to take any of those as a starting point? Mark, you look like you're about to.
I'm just thinking about why we need to put the idea of sacrificing excellence or quality at the expense of responsibly doing the job that we need to in selecting good funding projects. I think those aren't mutually exclusive or need to be seen as trade-offs necessarily. I think that you need good, strong criteria that sort of tell people who are making those assessments what to look for. I mean, I don't want to parrot back the guide on certain things, and the work that's been done by Dora already sort of says, is it a good thing that you're doing when you set your criteria up? How easy will it be for your peer reviewers to measure it and look at it, and what is the impact like it? So I kind of feel that we're just improving things all of the time. It doesn't feel like we're asking like there to be a trade-off. And maybe I've misunderstood the question, but I think that when you're doing the job responsibly, and you're setting up good criteria, and you're asking panelists and training panelists and getting them to do as much as they can, and you're providing them with these wonderful little cheat sheets that you've got of reminding them about unconscious bias. I mean, I just would stick those in the back of my guidelines right now. And those kind of things, or whether you want an impact framework, it's all there that you can pick from And you can be assured that you're broadening the appeal of that research, coming back to our social contract and our license to do this.
Yeah, yes, I agree with that. I think the idea of we're not sacrificing quality, of course, is in fact it's completely the reverse. We are defining what quality looks like in a responsible research assessment framework. Lee or Grace, would you like to comment on perhaps the question around AI? I paraphrased slightly what was there, but I would be interested to know if you had any reflections on that at all.
Yeah, of course. Last year, that was our side event, one of the topics of our side event, which was led by our council, the Global Research Council annual meeting, because we believe that, yeah, AI has a strong potential to improve research assessment, but of course, it must be used carefully. So it can help process large amounts of information faster, support reviewers also by organizing evidence and improve consistency in how proposals or outputs are assessed. But however, AI should not replace our human judgment. So this will just be a tool, support tool. So research quality, impact, and context are complex and still need the expert review and discussion. So there is also a risk that AI may reinforce biases, but it is because it's based on limited or biased data. And from RRA perspective, AI should be used as, again, as a support tool, not as a main decision maker. So it should help make assessment more transparent, fair, and efficient while keeping human oversight, accountability, and context-sensitive judgment. So AI can strengthen research assessment, but only if it is used responsibly and combined with human expertise. And for this GRC annual meeting, we are actually proposing a guide for the funders in terms of AI together with RDIA of Saudi Arabia. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. That's great to know. Lee, would you be willing to take the question about peer review? We've actually just had another question pop into the chat about how do we get peer reviewers on the roadmap and over the bridge with us. And I think that maybe the whole idea of the role of peer review is something that is going to be something that we'll have to think about really carefully.
It will be, and perhaps it's a segue from a couple of those questions as well. I think obviously the role of AI. We're seeing on the application side, agentic AI and volume really increasing with the researchers using AI to draft the funding applications, whether that's allowed or not by different funder rules, I guess is person aside. But obviously the converse to that is increased applications is increased burden on peer reviewers. So it's about really trying to have some of those proper settings in place around those guardrails to make sure peer reviewers aren't overwhelmed, because they very quickly will be if things aren't in place. But it's also about really responsible and ethical approaches to how reviewers can be utilising AI as part of the assessment process as well. The key thing there is it still needs to be the expert human judgment that is making those decisions. So I think really needs to be a balance on both sides. And perhaps go back to Mark's thing there is I'd also agree. I think it's quality and RRA are not mutually exclusive. In fact, RRA I think is fundamental to improving the quality of the applications coming forward as well, and having that sort of broader view about what the research question being answered is.
Fantastic, thank you. I might draw the questions to a close now. We're almost at the end. Apologies to those that we didn't get to. This is such a great conversation. Really appreciate all of your insights. I think there are about 2 or 3 things that I would take away from this. The first one is I feel, and I think Mark probably touched on this, we're doing a very big thing here. We're trying to address some really big challenges. And I think that the idea of having responsible research assessment talks to the idea of the social license that we have, the responsible use of the money that goes into research. And so I think whenever perhaps we're talking about the need for change, it's not change for change's sake, it's change because we're trying to address some really big issues that sit within our ecosystem. The second one I would just say is just highlighting the importance of leadership. And of course, leadership can be at a very high level in an organization, but actually individuals can be leaders wherever they are. And I think for everybody on this call, everybody who's participated here, I mean, by thinking about it, you are in fact leading in your area. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves also of the power that we have there. And the third one is the need for dialogue. And so, Mark, thank you for raising the idea that we need to be talking continuously amongst our communities and sort of reinforcing and learning from each other, and not both within our countries, but also within our region. And I think that hopefully what the conversation today that we started will help with that. So I will say we are actually at Dora really looking forward to keeping the conversation going with everybody on this call. We have funder groups both in the Asia Pacific region and in the Americas and Europe. We also have groups that we also have. So if you are from a funder and you're not part of those right now, please let us know. We'd be delighted to help you join those. We also have and we'd be very happy to speak about the guide at any of your funder meetings. So please do get in touch if that is of use. Our email is info@sfdora.org. We're pretty easy to find. We'd be happy to speak about this at any other opportunities. We also have communities of practice that Dora supports outside funders. So we have one that has just begun in Australia for institutions. There is one beginning in Japan. And there are also a number of other groups that we support. So if any of those are of interest, please just get in touch. We have an event coming up on 2nd of June in the Asia Pacific region, which is going to be part of but just before the Force 11 meeting in Singapore. So if you are going to be at the Force 11 meeting, or if you think you might be in Singapore, please get in touch. We'd love to have you join you there. And then after this meeting, we will follow up with the guide and the resources that have been mentioned. And also there'll be some other resources that are coming out of the 2 other online events that we are hosting. There was one yesterday and there'll be one later today. We would love you to share this amongst your communities. We would really like to hear your feedback on it and would welcome any ideas that you have, perhaps to improve it, and also let us know how you used it, because I think that helps us with what we do next. So with that, I will thank everyone for coming today. Thank you to Grace, thank you to Mark, thank you to Lee for excellent conversations, really rich. Thank you to everyone who has participated online, and I look forward to seeing you at the next Dora event. Thank you.